Greetings, bibliophiles, and welcome back to The Book Thing. Today I'm going to be talking about John le Carré's Our Kind of Traitor, and this one was quite interesting because it is in some ways a typical le Carré spy thriller, and in other ways very much not. Now this is actually one I got from my local library. I'm just going to throw in a little PSA here. Support your local libraries because libraries are awesome, and I quite frequently go in and just pick something that catches my eye, and this was the case here. Now, I've read a whole bunch of le Carré over the years, but this particular novel, this is one of his more recent ones, published in 2010, I think it was. Yeah, not read it before, and so it was quite interesting coming to it, because his more recent novels tend to be more varied in subject and also a bit more varied in tone, and that's definitely the case with this one. But there are also, it being a le Carré novel, some commonalities, some features that you would expect to find that are very much in evidence. So I'll briefly describe at least the start of the plot. A lot of the more recent ones have been, like, we think of le Carré and we think, Cold War spy thrillers. But obviously, it's not the Cold War anymore, and le Carré has always been the kind of writer that writes about stuff that's contemporary. And so in the last couple of years, we've had things about like corporate greed, and we've had terrorism. In fact, he's done several books with that kind of theme. We've had international politics. We've had the war on terror, which is not necessarily the same thing as writing about terrorism. And this one is about international crime. Kind of. It's more about the specifically international money laundering, the proceeds of crime. And it is rather less action-filled in some ways. In fact, I would say in a lot of ways, it's probably his least action-filled book that I've ever read. And there's one or two scenes where stuff happens, but for the most part, it's really quite sedate. And I would say the major difference with this and anything else of his I've anything else I've read, is that it almost feels more like a series of character portraits against the backdrop of the plot, rather than the plot driving everything else forwards. Because, like The Constant Gardener is a really good example here. There's always really good character development in le Carré novels, and that has become more so the case as the years have gone by, because he's been writing for a fair few decades now. But something like The Constant Gardener, where you get to know the central character fairly well, but it's the plot that drives everything forwards, where in this case it's the characters against a backdrop, basically. It feels almost, there's something of the play about it. Let's put it that way. These are performers on a stage. That's how it feels. And I don't, like, I say that and it maybe makes it sound kind of like stagey. It maybe makes it sound like that's in a bad way, but I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean it in a way that, I don't know how to put it exactly. It's very carefully constructed anyway. And it's despite the lack of action and despite the fact that it is heavily character focused, it's interesting. I think if I was going to compare it to one of his earlier ones, just in terms of how much the characters are the focus of it, it would probably be something like A Small Town in Germany, which was obviously very firmly one of the Cold War era ones. So the central plot concerns basically a pair of Brits on holiday getting involved, accidentally on their part, unintentionally, in a defection almost. It's this guy, this money launderer, who, as we learn over the course of the book, has his reasons why he wants to come over to... he specifically picks Britain, but he basically wants to come over to defect to somebody to be safe and to have his family be safe. And it sort of ends up like he's one of the main characters, and yet we don't really see that much of him, but we get a lot of description of his character. And of the other characters in the book, it's interesting. It's hard to describe anyone in particular as being the main protagonist. Now, of the two, like, civilians, I guess we'll call them just for the sake of convenience, that get caught up in this, Perry and Gale, we get quite a lot from Gale's point of view, but we also get some bits that are from Perry's point of view. And there's another character that comes in later, one of the spies, called Luke, who we also get bits from his point of view. So you could say there are kind of three protagonists, kind of, but it's hard to pin it down to, like, it's not that kind of a novel where there's just one main character and everything's kind of like they're on a quest or a journey or whatever. It's more slow character development. And actually structurally, the first part of the novel is quite interesting because you get almost a précis of what happens in the first third of the book on just the first couple of pages. And then it spends that next third of the book really expounding on those first couple of pages and really laying everything out. And then for the rest of the book after that, it becomes much more conventional. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read out, like, literally the first 2 pages maybe, because you'll maybe get some idea of the kind of style that I mean, because he really does start off right away just trying to drum in some sense of these characters, who these people are, what motivates them. And that's always been a strength of le Carré, is that kind of subtlety of character, but it almost it sometimes ends up being almost something you could caricature about le Carré's writing as well, that everybody has these deep, complex motives that are like subtle and ambivalent and equivocal. And of course, that's just not always true. But it's just kind of like a feature of le Carré's writing, I suppose. It's one of his hallmarks. So it starts off with a quotation. "Princes in this case do hate the traitor, though they love the treason." This is attributed to someone called Samuel Daniel, and I have no idea who that is. But it does thematically set you up rather nicely for what comes later in the book. So chapter 1, this is literally page 1. At 7 o'clock of a Caribbean morning on the island of Antigua, one Peregrine Makepeace, otherwise known as Perry, an all-round amateur athlete of distinction and until recently tutor in English literature at a distinguished Oxford college, played 3 sets of tennis against a muscular, stiff-backed, bold, brown-eyed Russian man of dignified bearing in his middle 50s called Dima. How this match came about was quickly the subject of intense examination by British agents professionally disposed against the workings of chance. Yet, the events leading up to it were, on Perry's side, blameless. The dawning of his 30th birthday, 3 months previously, had triggered a life change in him that had been building up for a year or more without his being aware of it. Seated, head in hands, at 8 o'clock in the morning in his modest Oxford rooms, after a 7-mile run that had done nothing to ease his sense of calamity, he had searched his soul to know just what the first third of his natural life had achieved, apart from providing him with an excuse for not engaging in the world beyond the city's dreaming spires. Why? To any outward eye, his was the ultimate academic success story. The state-educated son of secondary school teachers arrives in Oxford from London University, laden with academic honours, and takes up a 3-year post awarded him by an ancient, rich, achievement-driven college. His first name, traditionally the property of the English upper classes, derives from a rabble-rousing Methodist prelate even, of the 19th century named Arthur Peregrine of Huddersfield. In the term time, when he isn't teaching, he distinguishes himself as a cross-country runner and sportsman. On his spare evenings, he helps out in a local youth club. In vacations, he conquers difficult peaks and most serious climbs. Yet, when his college offers him a permanent fellowship, or, to his present soured way of thinking, imprisonment for life, he balks. Again, why? Last term, he had delivered a series of lectures on George Orwell under the title A Stifled Britain, and his rhetoric had alarmed him. Would Orwell have believed it possible that the same overfed voices which had haunted him in the 1930s, the same crippling incompetence, addiction to foreign wars, and assumptions of entitlement, were happily in place in 2009? Receiving no response from the blank student faces staring up at him, he had supplied it for himself. No. Orwell would emphatically not have believed it, or if he had, he would have taken to the streets. He would have smashed some serious glass. It was a topic he'd thrashed out mercilessly with Gail, his long-standing girlfriend, as they lay in her bed after a birthday supper at the flat in Primrose Hill that she had part inherited from her otherwise penniless father. I don't like dons, and I don't like being one myself. I don't like academia, and if I never have to wear a bloody gown again, I'll feel a free man, he'd ranted at the gold-brown hair clustered comfortably on his shoulder. And, receiving no reply beyond a sympathetic purr, hammering on about Byron, Keats and Wordsworth to a bunch of bored undergraduates whose highest ambition is to get a degree, get laid and get rich. Done it. Been there. Fuck it. And, raising the odds, about the only thing that would really keep me in this country is a bloody revolution. And Gail, a sparky young barrister on the rise, blessed with looks and a quick tongue, sometimes a little too quick for her own comfort as well as Perry's, assured him that no revolution would be complete without him. Both were de facto orphans. If Perry's late parents had been the soul of high-minded Christian socialist abstinence, Gail's were the other thing. Her father, a sweetly useless actor, had died prematurely of alcohol, 60 cigarettes a day, and a misplaced passion for his wayward wife. Her mother, an actress but less sweet, had vanished from the family home when Gail was 13, and was reputed to be living the simple life on the Costa Brava with a second cameraman. Perry's initial reaction to his life decision to shake the dust of academia from his feet, irrevocable, like all Perry's life decisions, was to return to his grassroots. The only son of Dora and Alfred would put himself where their convictions had been. He would begin his teaching career all over again at the point where they'd been forced to abandon theirs. He would stop playing the intellectual high flyer, sign up for an honest-to-God teacher training course, and, in their image, qualify as a secondary school teacher in one of his country's most deprived areas. He would teach set subjects and any sport they cared to throw at him to children who needed him as a lifeline to self-fulfillment rather than as a ticket to middle-class prosperity. But Gail was not as alarmed by this prospect as he intended her to be. For all his determination to be at the hard centre of life, there remained the other unreconciled versions of him, and Gail was on familiar terms with most of them. Yes, there was Perry, the self-punishing student at London University where they'd first met, who, in the mould of T.E. Lawrence, had taken his bicycle to France in the vacations and ridden it until he keeled over with exhaustion. And yes, there was Perry the Alpine adventurer, the Perry who could run no race and play no game, from seven-a-side rugby to pass the parcel with her nephews and nieces at Christmas time without a compulsive need to win. But there was also Perry the closet sybarite, who treated himself to unpredictable bursts of luxury before hurrying back to his garret. And this was the Perry who stood on the best tennis court at the best recession-hit resort in Antigua on that early May morning before the sun got too high to play, with the Russian Dima on one side of the net and Perry the other, and Gail wearing a swimsuit and a broad-brimmed floppy hat and a silky cover-up that covered very little, sitting amid an unlikely assembly of dead-eyed spectators, some dressed in black, who appeared to have sworn a collective oath not to smile, not to speak, and not to express any interest in the match they were being compelled to watch. So that's the first, 3 and a bit pages, and that's also pretty much what the first third of the book spends unpacking. It might not even be the first third, it just felt like the first section of the book. So it's interesting, but I think this one is more for fans of le Carré rather than something you would say, here's a good introduction to le Carré. It's really, it's hard to overstate how character-driven this is, and you get some real flavour of that just in those early pages. He really starts to give you a sense of these characters who maybe don't quite know themselves, and it starts off with this focus on Perry, but it really is you don't get to hear stuff from Perry's point of view until a bit later on. You actually hear a lot from Gail, and you sort of see Gail's vision of Perry, but you also get to see some of Gail's vision of herself as well. And that first bit of the book was actually a lot less interesting to me. Just the way he laid it out and the way he decided to unfold this bit of, this fateful tennis match. I honestly would have preferred a more conventional format. But later on, it did pick up. And I think this is one of the reasons why it took me a little while to finish this. It's not especially a long book, but it took me about a month to get through it, just because it's one of those ones where it starts off and it's hard to, like, I was having to make myself read it. And then you get into it a bit. You get to know the characters a bit. It picks up a bit in terms of what's actually happening. And then once you hit that more conventional pacing, it became a lot easier to just keep reading through. So yeah, it was interesting, and it's not necessarily one I'd go out and buy and put on my shelf next to the other Le Carré novels that I actually do have on my shelf. But I'm glad I read it, and it was as usual. Like Le Carré's always got this rather cynical take on the world, and he's not necessarily wrong in some things. But there's always, throughout all of his novels, there's always this cynical sense of realpolitik just trumping everything else completely, and that's definitely true in this as well. I'll also say that if you're expecting a happy ending, just don't read Le Carré novels ever at all. Sometimes the endings, like, I would say he's never written a happy ending. I would say sometimes the endings are it's still like to put it in a really crass way, the good guys win. Although it's debatable as to whether there are ever really good guys in a Le Carré novel. But even in those cases where you might really crassly say the good guys won, they're still never happy endings. So I don't think it's really a spoiler to say that. And I was getting towards the end and thinking, yeah, this is probably going to, like, regardless of what happens, it's probably going to be fairly downbeat. And it was. So don't read this expecting it to be a happy, cheerful novel. Don't read any Le Carré novel and expect it to be happy and cheerful, because you will just be sorely disappointed. So next I will, I think I'm just going to pick something from my shelf. I think I've settled into a pattern. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of go from something new to something old. I'm just going to alternate, because I've got a lot of books on my shelf, a lot of which I haven't read for a long time, and I could just do that, but there's new books out there that I haven't read as well, rather than just reading stuff that I have read before, albeit a long time ago. So I'm going to stick with this for the time being. I'm going to go with something old, something new, and we'll see how that works out. So I'll be interested to hear anybody's thoughts on Le Carré below, or maybe even this novel specifically if you've read it. Hopefully you've found this video as ever interesting, and if you have, you can leave any other comments and thoughts below. You can hit the like button, you can sub to this channel, and as always, stay tuned for more.